Hi, everyone. Member of Parliament Garnet Jennis here. We are counting down the minutes, the seconds to this very important vote on the Emergencies Act. And I want to thank you for following my page, for being engaged in this conversation, and encourage you to share this video, share your feedback in the comments as well. Tonight, we are voting on a motion to confirm the government's declaration of an emergency. So the government used the powers they have under the Emergencies Act to declare an emergency. They did that a week ago. And the act allows the government to do it anytime they want. But when the government declares an emergency, they have to bring in a motion before Parliament to confirm that declaration. And if that motion is defeated, then the emergency stops right then. Whereas if the motion passes, then the vote is confirmed, and then the state of emergency as such continues until such a time as a new motion comes before Parliament that repeals it, until the government pulls it back, or at 30 days the government has to seek to renew that emergency again. So that is the dynamics we're in. Again, we're voting on the continuation of the emergency. Effectively, the emergency is already in effect. We are voting on its continuation. And there have been some really interesting developments since the start even of this debate. The debate on this motion started on Thursday. And already by the start of this debate, all of the border blockades had been cleared. Many of them had already started to be cleared before the state of emergency was even declared. And over the weekend, there was an police operation in Ottawa, in various ways controversial, but in any event, the blockades, as well as the sort of protest camp that was in place in Ottawa, have all been cleared. So today, in the context of the debate that's happening, many members of Parliament are saying, okay, even if you accept that it was legitimate to have the emergency measures in place a week ago, and Conservatives dispute that, but people were saying, even if you accept that it was legitimate at that time, why should we be continuing this state of emergency? And the Prime Minister, the government House Leader, says, oh, we need it to preempt any further problems. And this is quite a radical idea that was expressed by, in particular, the government House Leader during question period, that effectively they need these emergency measures not to respond to actual events, not to respond to actual blockading and actual occupation, because there's none in place, but they're saying they need it sort of as preemptive measures against the possible return of such measures. And I mean, there's been no serious violence, there's been no loss of life, fortunately, in the context of any of these operations. And now there are no blockades by any definition taking place. So it's really the facts on the ground completely undercut the position the government is taking. But the other thing that's happened, and I think the reason why we can expect this motion to pass tonight, is because the government has declared this a confidence motion. Now, when the government declares a confidence motion, it means that if they lose the vote, then we'll have to go to an election. And Conservatives are not intimidated by this tactic. We are committed to doing the right thing, to voting against the confirmation motion. But it started to look like many members of the NDP caucus, some members of the Liberal caucus, were looking at the facts, looking at the law, and saying it just doesn't make sense to have this motion pass. And I wonder if the Prime Minister and his team were looking at the numbers and saying, we've got NDP MPs, we've got Liberal MPs, even though the Liberals and the NDP as parties were expected to support the motion, we've got individual MPs that are saying, we're not comfortable with the direction here, and starting to consider voting against the motion. So that's when the Prime Minister came and used this threat of an election, saying basically, if a majority of MPs vote against confirming the election, we consider it a confidence motion, which means we go into an election. And there were two Liberal MPs today in the House of Commons, Nate Erskine-Smith and Joel Lightband, who gave speeches in which they said they, in principle, would oppose the motion. The only reason they're voting for the motion is because it's been deemed a confidence measure. So for some of these backbench Liberal MPs that have real reservations, this threat of an election, this threat that this would be deemed a confidence motion, and the implied threat is if you vote against the Prime Minister on a confidence motion, then perhaps your position as a Liberal MP would be threatened in some way. Maybe you'd be kicked out of caucus or something. And recall, Conservatives have adopted measures of the Reform Act, which means that members of the Conservative caucus can only be removed from caucus by a majority vote of caucus. But the Liberals are much less democratic internally. It's just a matter of the Prime Minister saying you're out, and that's what he did to Jane Philpott and Jody Wilson-Raybould. No vote. So Liberal MPs are in a sense in a much less democratic environment. They're much more beholden to their leader than members of our caucus. So the Prime Minister has declared this a confidence motion, which is a threat that I expect will compel Liberal MPs to vote with the government, even if they don't really want to. And same thing with the NDP. The NDP don't want an election. We don't know this, but the way the Liberals and the NDP have just been in lockstep on everything since the last election, it looks like they have some kind of deal or arrangement behind the scenes. I can't prove that. I can't confirm that. But the way they operate together, it looks like parties that have some kind of a confidence and supply deal. So they're saying on matters of confidence, I suspect they're saying we vote together. So it's a very interesting tactic of the Prime Minister because it reveals that he can't actually convince a majority of members of Parliament to side with him on this so-called state of emergency. When by any measure, the events that were used as a justification have by and large ended. But he still wants to grab these draconian powers, or at least to save face from looking silly for having used this Emergency Act. So he is now claiming that this is a confidence issue, and therefore using that hammer as a way to hold down and control his MPs. And so I suspect that you'll see votes taking place along party lines. At least one, maybe both of the Green Party MPs will vote against these measures. Conservatives and Bloc will vote against these measures. And Conservatives have been clear and consistent on this from the beginning. The Bloc have especially today been saying, well, given that the protests have been cleared, it doesn't make any sense to say there's still an emergency. But they still want these excessive tools to go after people's bank accounts, to go after vehicle licensing, to be able to do these things without a court order. They still want to have these tools in place. So you can see on the screen beside me here that we've got the countdown. The vote is going to start in a few seconds here. So I'm at home in Alberta. I'm voting virtually. You'll see some members voting who are physically in the chamber, and then some members voting virtually. So we'll go directly just to the House of Commons feed right now, and you can watch that happening. First, you'll see people voting on the floor, and then you'll see the faces flash across the screen of those voting virtually. Folks, and just to explain a quick point of process, in a moment, you're going to see the whips from the two major parties, Conservative and Liberal, walk down the aisle, bow to each other, go back to their spots. That's part of the convention. And then the speaker will read the question, and then the vote will take place. So we'll go to that.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The eyes of the nation are upon us tonight. Earlier today, the Prime Minister signaled, as did a member of his backbench, that tonight's vote is a confidence vote. Convention requires that the Prime Minister to publicly declare a confidence vote of this nature as such following convention. My question for the government House Leader is the vote tonight a confidence vote? And if the vote is lost, will the Prime Minister plunge us into an election?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the debate, but it's time to vote.
The question is the following one. Mr. Medicino, seconded by Mr. Trudeau, moved that pursuant to Section 58 of the Emergencies Act, this House confirm the declaration of a public order emergency proclaimed on February 14th, 2022. La période de 10 minutes pour les députés votants.
The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started, and the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person. All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Gabra.
Mr. Algabra.
Ms. Groh.
Ms. Grove.
Mr. McGuinty.
Mr. McGuinty.
Mr. Scarpaleggia.
Scarpaleggia.
Ms. Cara.
Ms. Cara.
Monsieur Vandal.
Mr. Vandal.
Monsieur McKinnon-Gatineau.
Mr. McKinnon-Gatineau.
Monsieur Miller.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Mendicino.
Mr. Mendicino.
Monsieur Serré.
Mr. Serré.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Mr. Dhaliwal.
Monsieur Arsenault.
Mr. Arsenault.
Monsieur Sanson.
Mr. Sanson.
Mr. Fillmore.
Mr. Fillmore.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Mrs. Romanado.
Mrs. Romanado.
Mr. Lamour.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Ms. Sahota.
Ms. Sahota.
Mr. Virani.
Mr. Virani.
Mr. Fergus.
Mr. Fergus.
Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Ms. Dillon.
Ms. Dillon.
Mr. Essasi.
Mr. Assassi.
Madame Mendez.
Madame Mendez.
Mr. Nagvi.
Mr. Nakvi.
Mr. Sidhu Brampton East.
Mr. Sidhu Brampton East.
Mrs. Suds.
Mrs. Suds.
Mr. Fragiscatos.
Mr. Fagascatos.
Mr. Maloney.
Mr. Maloney.
Mr. Shifke.
Mr. Shifke.
Mr. Sorbara.
Mr. Sabara.
Mr. Dong.
Mr. Dong.
Mr. Lewis Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Lewis Kitchener-Conestoga.
Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Ms. Blaney.
Ms. Blaney.
Mr. Boulris.
Mr. Bullis.
Madame Hughes.
Madam Hughes.
Ms. Matheson.
Ms. Matheson.
Ms. Idlov.
Ms. Idlov.
Ms. Barron.
Ms. Barron.
Ms. Sanich Gulf Highlands.
Ms. May Sanich.
All those opposed to the motion will please rise.
Ms. Bergen. Ms. Finlay.
Ms. Finlay.
Mr. Paulus.
Mr. Pulis.
Mr. Nater.
Mr. Nader.
Mr. Barlow.
Mr. Barlow.
Mr. Chong.
Mr. Chong.
Mr. Moore.
Mr. Moore.
Mr. Brassard.
Mr. Brassard.
Mr. Berthold.
Mr. Berthold.
Mr. Albus.
Mr. Aldous.
Ms. Danshaw.
Ms. Danshaw.
Mr. Macaulay Edmonton West.
Mr. Macaulay Edmonton West.
Mr. Schmale.
Mr. Schmale.
Mr. Tucker.
Mr. Tucker.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Duncan Stormondanda Salgangari.
Mr. Duncan Stormont Dundas, South Gary.
Mr. Kimmich,
Mr. Kimmich.
Mr.
Mr.
Calkins,
Hawkins.
Mr. Upal,
Mr. Upal.
Mr. Malillo,
Mr. Malillo.
Mr. Aitchison,
Mr. Aitchison.
Mr. Lobb,
Mr. Lobb.
Mr. Perkins,
Mr. Perkins.
Mrs. Gallant,
Mrs. Gallant.
Mr. Reed,
Mr. Reed.
Mr. Caputo,
Mr. Caputo.
Ms. Ferrari,
Ms. Ferrari.
Monsieur Martel,
Mr. Martel.
Monsieur Gourde,
Mr. Gould.
Mr. Steinley,
Mr. Steinley.
Ms. Rude,
Ms. Rude.
Madame Vien,
Madame Vien.
Ms. Lewis, Alderman Norfolk,
Ms. Lewis. Alderman Norfolk.
Mrs. Block,
Mrs. Block.
Mr. Vierson,
Mr. Vierson.
Mr. Williamson,
Mr. Williamson.
Mr. McGuire,
Mr. McGuire.
Mr. Aboutaif,
Mr. Aboutayev.
Mr. Arnold,
Mr. Arnold.
Monsieur Généreux,
Mr. Généreux.
Monsieur Deltel,
Mr. Deltel.
Monsieur Godin,
Mr. Godin.
Mr. Cooper,
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Kelly,
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Kitchen,
Mr. Kitchen.
Mrs. Stubbs,
Mrs. Stubbs.
Mr. Shields,
Mr. Shields.
Mr. Waugh,
Mr. Wall.
Mr. Weber,
Mr. Weber.
Mr. Motts,
Mr. Motts.
Monsieur Lew,
Mr. Lew.
Mr. Bragdon,
Mr. Bragdon.
Mr. Dalton,
Mr. Dalton.
Mr. Doddle,
Mr. Dowdle.
Mr. Cram,
Mr. Cram.
Mr. Curek,
Mr. Currick.
Mr. Morrison,
Mr. Morrison.
Mr. Patzer,
Mr. Patzer.
Mr. Soroka,
Mr. Soroka.
Mr. Van Pupta,
Mr. Van Pupta.
Mr. Ruff,
Mr. Ruff.
Mr. Brock,
Mr. Brock.
Mr. Muse,
Mr. Muse.
Mrs. Roberts,
Mrs. Roberts.
Mr. Barrett,
Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Poiliev,
Mr. Polyev.
Monsieur Terrien,
Mr. Terrier.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie, Madame Normandin, Monsieur Simard, Monsieur Bergeron,
Mr. Bergeron.
Madame de Bellefeuille,
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Madame Michaud,
Madame Michaud.
Monsieur Brunel Duceppe,
Monsieur Brunel Duceppe.
Monsieur Thériault,
Monsieur Thériault.
Monsieur Perron,
Monsieur Perron.
Monsieur Barsalou Duval,
Monsieur Barcelou Duval.
Monsieur Champoux,
Monsieur Champoux.
The House will now wait for the electronic voting period to end before resuming its proceedings.
Hi, everyone. So just a quick update as the vote unfolds. You'll see now the in-person voting is complete. You'll see the faces flashing across the screen of those that are participating in the vote virtually. And then at the end of that, the speaker will call on anyone who had a technical problem to confirm their vote. Now, the way our voting app works is my photo was actually flagged. So I'll be one of those people that have raised my hand and will confirm with the speaker that my vote was a no vote. And then at the end, the speaker will announce their results. As far as I've been able to see, no surprises in terms of Liberal or NDP members breaking ranks. And that's what I expected in light of the intimidation effort really by the Prime Minister, the declaration of this as a confidence motion. And I just want to encourage you to stay on the live stream after the vote is done. I'll be bringing some reaction because I want people to know that there are other parliamentary tools that will allow us to revisit this issue very soon. So I want to give you an update on some of the provisions in the Emergency Act that, given that this is likely to pass, we'll be able to revisit it and continue this fight as we go forward. Conservatives will be relentless in standing up for Canadians' rights and freedoms, and we have other tools that will be available to us. So I'll bring you an update on that as soon as the vote is finished. So you'll see the rest of the names flashing across the screen, and then the speaker will call on those who had problems voting to confirm their vote and to do so verbally through the virtual system. And then the speaker will announce the results. And then, like I said, I'll be there at the end to provide you with some updates about the steps that will come next.
I wish to inform the House that the electronic voting period has ended. I will invite members who encounter technical difficulties to identify themselves. If members were not able to vote due to technical difficulties, they may now use the raise hand function and the chair will recognize them. Ms. Zurowitz.
Mr. Speaker, my app has asked me to confirm that I have voted, and I vote yay.
Your vote has been cast as yes. Madame Kayabaga.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais voter oui pour la motion.
Okay, bon. Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, I had issues with the app. I will be voting nay contre.
Mr. Morris, nay contre.
Okay. Madame Wagenthal.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. I would like to confirm that I voted nay.
Against contre.
Mr. Hoback.
Mr. Speaker, to confirm that I voted no.
Mr. Fall.
He confirmed.
Mr. Fall.
My vote was recorded as a nay.
Okay, voted. Good. Mr. Fast.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no.
Mr. Fast. Against contre.
Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to make sure you know that I vote no to this motion.
Mr. McLean. Against contre.
Monsieur Singh.
I vote for the motion.
Shame.
Mr. Singh for pour.
Ms. Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, I want to confirm that my vote is no.
Mrs. Thomas. Against contre.
Ms. Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to confirm that my vote is no.
Confirmed? It is confirmed. Mr. Genius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to confirm that my vote was cast as a nay.
It is registered. Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just too want to confirm that my vote was cast as a negative nay.
Your vote was registered as nay. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Stewart. Okay, maybe we'll go back. Ms. Kwan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My voting app was not working, and I vote yes.
Ms. Kwan, pour 4.
Ms. Gray.
Mr. Speaker, I vote no.
That is confirmed.
That is confirmed. Mr. Tolmie.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to confirm that my vote was a nay.
Your vote was registered as nay. Mr. Viss.
Mr. Speaker, I confirm that my vote was nay.
It is confirmed at nay. Mr. Stewart.
Can you hear me?
Go for it.
Can you hear me now?
In any way. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we will compile a vote.
Yeas pour 185, 185. Nays contre 151, 151.
I declare the motion carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to file with you pursuant to Section 59 of the Emergencies Act, a motion to revoke the Prime Minister's emergency declaration that was proclaimed last week. The motion is signed by more than 20 members of the Conservative Party. This motion,
The Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, there was a House order. The House would adjourn after the vote, Mr. Speaker.
We were waiting for 2 points of order this time. I'll let her finish, and then we'll finish up
consider
tonight.
the matter at the next sitting week. I say this to all Canadians, that Conservatives will continue to use every tool at our disposal to end the Prime Minister's abuse.
The Honourable Speaker,
point of order, Mr. Speaker. You can't even. This is not a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Are we done? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to take the time to thank the staff who stayed over the course of the weekend, the clerks, the House administration. It has been a long hour. This has been a historic debate, but I think we should thank all the people who serve this place for their incredible service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It being 8:23 p.m. pursuant to the order made Thursday, February 17th, 2022, the House stands adjourned until Monday, February 28th, 2022 at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 28.2 and 24.1.
All right, so that's the results of the vote. Unfortunately, the vote passes. But as soon as the vote passed, you would have seen Candace Bergen, Conservative Party leader, getting up on a point of order. And what did she do? She invoked another part of the Emergencies Act, which says at any time when a so-called emergency is in effect, 20 members of Parliament can table a motion in the House that calls for a reconsideration of that emergency. And that means that as soon as the House comes back, we will get right back into debate on the Emergencies Act, considering another motion to reconsider that emergency. So Conservatives are in no way letting up whatsoever. So the emergency is declared on Monday. We have the vote today confirming the emergency, so it's still in effect. But then we put forward a motion to immediately require the reconsideration of that emergency. Now, this week is ordinarily a parliamentary break week. So we won't actually have an opportunity to move our motion forward this week because, unfortunately, the House is not scheduled to sit Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week. But on Monday of next week, and I'm not 100% sure of the rules, if the Speaker will require a certain gap of 24 or 48 hours. But either way, if the emergency is still in effect next week, we will immediately, we will certainly at some point in that week be into debating this opposition conservative motion for the reconsideration of that emergency. So I think it's important for folks watching at home to be seized with and concerned about what has happened, but at the same time to know that that we, under the very strong, principled, and able leadership of our interim leader, Candice Bergen, will continue to be fighting back against this gross abuse of power by the Liberal government. The vote basically went how I expected. All Conservative, Liberal, NDP, and Bloc members voting along party lines. I guess the only sort of anomaly was the fact that the Green Party, having 2 MPs, split both ways. As far as I could see, Elizabeth May voted with the government in favor of the motion, and Mike Morris, the new Green MP from Ontario, voted against the motion. So the only party with diversity in it was with the Green Party, split 50-50. But the motion passed with the Liberals, the NDP voting in favor, and the Conservatives and the Bloc voting against. But we will be back into reconsideration of this in Parliament at the earliest possible opportunity. And it was important, I think, for our leader to stand up and signal that right away. So if people understand these extraordinary measures that are in effect because of the Emergency Act, again, they were begun on Monday. The government wanted to confirm them today, even though the blockades have all been cleared. And we are going to continue to push to end this so-called emergency, these emergency powers of the government. The emergency goes for 30 days, and then it has to be confirmed again unless there's a motion that to reconsider it passes. So we'll be debating that again this week. And I think it's fair to say with these reconsideration motions, Parliament will continue to be seized with this issue, debating this issue, voting on this issue until the government finally gives in and pulls back on that emergency. So folks, wherever you live in this country, please be in touch with your members of Parliament. Encourage them to do the right thing. Encourage them to take stands in future votes that will end these draconian powers. And if you don't follow my page already, please like, share this post, and follow my page. We're bringing daily content with important updates about things that are happening in Parliament here in Canada and around the world. This is an important time for our country, and everybody can be a part of making a difference on it by sharing content on social media, just spreading the word to people in your social circle and in your community, by calling your member of Parliament, by looking for ways that you could participate more actively in our democracy now and whenever the next election comes. All of you have an opportunity to be part of this process, engaged with me, engaged with members of Parliament, with Canadians from coast to coast in standing up for our rights and freedoms and standing up against this government overreach. So please do follow my page. We'll bring you regular updates and information about how you can be more involved as we go forward, as we challenge some of the things that are going on. So thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for sharing this content and following my page so that we can bring you more information. We'll be bringing you next week when the House takes up this reconsideration issue. We'll be bringing you lots of content at that time. I'm sure we'll live stream the vote again. Of course, it could be that the government will withdraw the emergency at some point between now and then, and that would, of course, be good news as well. But if they haven't withdrawn the emergency, then we'll be back next week with more of this content on the Emergencies Act, more coming out of Parliament, and of course, we'll be continuing to have information coming out throughout this week about the steps that we're taking as Conservatives in Parliament, working with you and people across the country to bring about the change that we need to see. We can fight for our country. We can defend our country. We can address these attacks, this division we see from the Liberal government, if we all are committed to being involved and working together towards that end. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. God bless. Have a great evening.